people come to us, not just because we're experts, but because they want a recommendation. Like they want us to say, not just say, hey, here are the packages, here are your options, here are the risks, whatever. They want us to say, here are the packages, here are the risks that you're dealing with. And from my perspective in your situation, I think you should be considering this.
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success.
Jeff, you gave me an introduction that I'm going to use. I don't usually use people's introductions that they feed me, but instead of saying if a story started with, it's that old adage, right? If an engineer, attorney, MBA, and entrepreneur walked into a room, it sounds like a joke, but this is actually who you are. So Jeff Holman of Intellectual Strategies, thank you for being on Your Brand Amplified today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Annika. It's great to be here. And that is my story. I have all that. We could dive into it, but it's maybe a unique blend of skills.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that because it's not often that you hear people go on as entrepreneurs. We often dabble in a lot of things, but to actually have all of those letters behind your name is unusual.
Yeah. I actually remember back to one time I was at a lunch meeting for a bunch of attorneys, and this speaker came in, and this was early in my legal career, right? And he said, and I had my engineering degree and I went into law school because with engineering and law, you can become a patent attorney. But I heard him speak and he's like, yeah, I think he had the same, some type of undergrad and an MBA and then a law degree. And I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I don't know, maybe that sparked it. It just put it in my mind.
Yeah. Well, so did you initially start out wanting to be an engineer, or was it something you were really good at, but then you saw these other opportunities?
Yeah, it's a great question because I actually knew that I wanted to go into engineering from high school. I really liked, my physics class and teacher, and I liked the sciences. I was good at math. I'm like, engineering is just the right fit. But I knew going into engineering that I didn't necessarily want to be an engineer. I didn't want to work in an engineering job my whole life. So I kind of went into it with this idea that engineering would probably be a really good background to get into business, which was, as soon as I graduated from engineering, as I was, walking with my class or whatever, 25 years ago, I was also applying for MBA schools. And I thought, I'm going to go to one of these really nice, well-ranked top 10 MBA schools and go do whatever, right? Do some type of business stuff. And clearly my path has diverted from that to some degree because I didn't go to business school right out of engineering. I went to law school a couple years later and then back to business school 14, 15 years after that. So
I would say though that's a great way to do things. I teach grad school and I have students who have jumped right from undergrad and I have students who have work experience. And I would say that the ones who have work experience are probably better equipped to be, understanding the material that we're going through, and they have a basis, a foundation at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. It was the right way to do it. It's just not what I thought I wanted. But looking back, I would suggest something similar to a lot of people, right? Going right into business. Now, I guess you could go and you could be, work at one of these big consulting firms and kind of build the money for that. Or you could go and maybe get into investment banking or whatever. But the value I got out of my MBA program was so much different. And of course I applied it differently. I was the only attorney in that class because everyone else is there for other reasons. And they're like, you're an attorney. What are you doing here? I'm like, well, I have a lot of small business clients that are, wearing all the hats in their own businesses. And I just want to understand better what they do, how they do it. Right. It's kind of like when I bought my first home with my wife, I was in engineering at the time. I was helping design, at least on paper, all these, hospitals and schools and large commercial buildings, where the plugs and lights and, transformers and all the electrical stuff goes. And I'm like, well, I'm building my own house. Maybe I should wire it too. Cause it's just Like, why not? Why not see what I can do? And I did a great job, I was told. I also was told that when I went in like for the 17th time to pick up supplies from the store, they're like, how big is this house? And I'm like, it's not that big. It's just maybe a little inefficiently wired. I don't know.
Yeah, a little bit of a learning on the way. So I'd love to hear, because obviously you have a heart and an interest in small businesses, entrepreneurs, and helping them get to where they need to be to set up a successful business, not just a hobby, right?
Absolutely.
So talk a little bit about that and your journey to starting Intellectual Strategies.
Yeah, those are paths are totally intertwined, right? So I went to Silicon Valley after law school, worked at what's called a patent boutique, where we worked with companies like IBM and Apple and large companies to a large extent, building patent portfolios. I quickly learned that I liked working with the smaller companies, the inventors, where you could meet the founder, you could sit down face to face, you could make a difference to them. And not that what we did for Intel, it's not that didn't matter. It's just, it was, from my perspective, it was one more patent in their portfolio. IBM, do they need their 7,001 patent for the year? That, it's a different impact. And so when you sit down and you make an impact with people one-on-one, face to face, there's a connection there that you can't get in other ways. And that really sparked me to want to work with smaller companies. And so that led me down a path of going out on my own. And the people I was with at the time, they were really great to me, and they hooked me up with some clients, and I ended up doing IBM work. I'm like 5 years later, I'm like, wait a second. I went out on my own to do this, and I ended up back on the same track with these same clients, right? So several years into that and running my own practice, I got to reboot. I got to serve the Balkis and the Sams and the Garys that that like are here locally with me, that are building something to change their lives. And so that's when I said, well, maybe I'll go get my MBA. I've wanted to do that forever. And I got my MBA, and what you learn in MBA school isn't necessarily applicable to running a small business. There are some programs that are starting to put more entrepreneurial content into their programs, but it's not many, and it's not great. And a lot of it's academic, speak, but I'm sure there are some good programs out there. It's just, 10 years ago, I think we're at the forefront of when people were saying, oh, let's build an entrepreneur program in our MBA class. So with all that, I basically, I took the classes, I learned the stuff, and I remember distinctly thinking to myself, when am I going to need to know this concept, revenue recognition from my managerial accounting class? I just am not going to need to know that as an attorney, but it's, helps me speak the language. And I kid you not, like 2 years later, I was sitting with a client, and, revenue recognition was the topic of the conversation, driving the contract. And I was sitting down with the sales team, and I'm like, hey, we have to write the contract so that it fits with how we recognize revenue, because, revenue recognition is like a huge driver in startup valuations. And I said, we got to write this. And there's always tension. Sales guys and legal, there's a lot of tension there, right? Sales they're lone wolves. They're kind of reckless. We're legal. We're seen as being the naysayers, and we block the sales from happening. And I sat down with him, and I said, well, let's do this so it's right. And he, we went back and forth, and he said, hey, let's go get Justin. Justin was our controller at the time, in the finance department. Let's go get Justin. I said, let's go get Justin. Because in the back of my mind, I knew I had talked with Justin about revenue recognition dozens of times, and I knew exactly what was going to happen, and it turned out to be true. So we go get Justin, bring him in, and we say, okay, hey, here's what we're trying to do. And Justin goes, well, revenue recognition. Yeah, let me think. There's like these there's 4, there's these rules. And it's like, and he finally stopped and he goes, Jeff, we've talked about this. You know this better than I do. Tell me what those were. And I'm like, thank you, Justin. That's, so it's just the MBA really put better vocabulary into my skill set to be able to talk with the people I was already talking with, but speak their language rather than, some people I talk to, they want to speak engineering. Some people, they want to speak law, but a lot of my clients, they're the business guys that want to speak business. And so that's what I try to do when I'm sitting down with somebody. I'm fortunate to have been through a couple different paths, I guess you would call them, and then to be able to sit down and kind of assess my audience and say, well, what are we speaking today? Are we speaking about the business in engineering terms, or are we speaking about the business in legal terms today? Which one do you want to talk about?
Yeah,
So.
I find that point really interesting because we're at a time right now where people are not sure about higher education, what value it has. You can get certifications. We're talking about upskilling, the age of AI. I'm presently getting my MBA. I'm almost done with a
Oh,
specialty.
congratulations.
Thank you. And I also, of course, went back later for that after my undergrad. But it's great to be able to be here now. And like you said, there are classes I'm not going to do. I'm not going to work for a big enterprise solution. So there's a lot of things I don't really need to know about supply chain and different accounting techniques. But
That's
it
what I
does lay,
thought, but it will come
yeah,
back up.
well, but it does lay a nice, steady foundation for, and it helps me also see how other people are teaching so that when I'm teaching, I know like I can kind of measure myself on a barometer. But I'm also getting a degree specializing in AI and ML, which of course is very timely. And so, yes, these tools are ever changing, but having a foundation for what it means, the big AI and the whole history and getting down to machine learning and then everything else and this little pocket of Gen AI that we're all living in now. So I think that's been one of the most helpful things about that. So I love that you're making the argument for the value of higher education. Thank you for that, because that's something that's really important to me as well. I have to say my three big things are education, AI, and podcasting.
Oh,
So
yes.
you can combine them all right now.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome because you really are doing something that's timely, right? There's this explosion is crossing over every job and every role right now, and it's super exciting to see what's going to happen. Everyone keeps thinking that lawyers are finally going to go away, and AI is going to allow us to never have to talk to anybody that does law again. I don't think that's the case, but the power behind it and the way that it magnifies the roles that exist right now is pretty phenomenal. So that's awesome.
I think that most of us who are in industry are saying that exact thing, that we're still going to need a lot of the human element, but we're going to need the strategists, the people who can understand all of the languages like you can. Yeah. And so that need not going to go away. It's not going to be replaced.
No, that's what I'm counting on. I hope so.
Well, I want to ask a little bit about what does it mean to you to be a fractional legal team? Because that's what you and your organization do for people.
I mean, at the simplest level, being a fractional legal team where we're effectively an in-house legal team for startups and scaling businesses on a fractional basis, it came down to simply aligning what our clients needed more than what they were getting, right? And so it's the best way to serve the clients that we're serving. So to put some more context around that, right? And I love that you brought up all this, the discussion of strategy. Like my whole path was be a patent attorney, run my own practice, try to work with small business. And then I realized, why do people need IP? Why do they need patents? Why do they need trademarks? And so I went down this rabbit hole of IP strategy. And I realized IP strategy is just a version of business strategy. And I took a business strategy class during my MBA. It was super timely and completely unhelpful because we talked about like ERPs and stuff like that. And I'm like, that might be helpful, but how is an ERP? An ERP doesn't tell me what strategy is. So I read all these books behind me and I'm like trying to figure out strategy. And I realized there's not a good definition of strategy. So I made one up, and all of that really led up to me changing my course from being a solo, small lawyer, patent attorney focused to being more of a general counsel for startups. And I said, well, if I'm going to do that, just like wiring my house, I'm like, well, I'm going to be a general counsel for a startup. Maybe I should go be a general counsel for a startup. And so I got my MBA. I went and I managed my practice, but I went in-house full-time essentially at the same time for this business. And that's where I realized we're not practicing law. We're not providing legal services like our small clients need, right? We just don't. And you don't realize it till you go into that position and you're like, oh, I literally said that 2 weeks in. I'm like, I've been doing this the wrong way. Not that what I was doing was malpractice wrong. It was just not the best way to serve these clients. And so that really led from 2015 on, that led to this, what we're talking about now, this fractional legal team this idea that small companies have all of the same problems, maybe not as big or as often, but they have all of the same roles, all of the same problems as a big company does. They just don't have the resources to deal with it. So the person operating the company wears 7 hats. And then they hire an attorney and they're like, well, my attorney should wear 7 hats too. And it's like, I mean, great, but that's not ideal. What would be ideal is if you could just, you don't want to have to hire attorneys all the time because that's no fun. And every attorney bills you differently and you hate all of them. So, the idea here is, well, why don't we just make it so you hire one team once, a team that's really focused on how you operate as a small business operator. And if you need patents, great. You got a patent guy. If you need trademarks, you got a trademark person. If you have contracts, if you have a dispute, if you are raising money, get the right expertise from the right attorney at the right time, all within one team, and do it on kind of this predictable budget. And I say all that, and it's kind of like, well, yeah, I have people. In fact, I had somebody reach out to me. He's a high level I think he's officially a VP at a company. He's doing his own startup on the side type of thing. And he just reached out on Monday, scheduled a call with me for, I guess, Tuesday, was it? Maybe Wednesday. I can't remember. And no, it was Wednesday. Scheduled a call for Wednesday. And cause I do like these free strategy calls. And he said, I said, how'd you find me? He said, oh, an internet search. I'm like, great. It's working. Right. But he said, I read your website and it just makes sense. Like the way you described working with small businesses. Why isn't everybody doing this? And I'm like, I don't know. They should be. I'm telling everybody to do it. I'm telling them how to do it. Like, look what I'm doing and copy it if you want. But this is literally the way that lawyers should be working with small businesses. It makes sense. And it minimizes the traditional hassles that we think of when we think of working with attorneys.
Yeah. I mean, as a small business owner, I know that the firm that gave me the registered trademark for your brand Amplified, that's all they specialize in. So then you have to think, okay, then, they'd have to introduce me to somebody else to focus on other things for my business. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And it's kind of like, why is this not being done more widely?
Yeah. And you think, why don't, from a strategic standpoint, because there's a lot of strategy that goes behind all of this, right? But from a strategic standpoint, people ask me, why don't other law firms just do this? Couldn't they just do the same thing? And I'm like, well, yeah, they could, but they're not going to. Like, they're not structurally built with the right business model behind them to allow them to do it. Law firms that exist already are built with a totally different, set in place business model. Usually it's kind of a pyramid type of scheme is the wrong word, but you know what I mean? It's a pyramid structure with partners making money off of associates and everybody having their own little kingdom and their own clientele. And if one person gets mad, they can leave and they can essentially take their clients with them. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way it should be ethically. But is that good for the clients? It's not good for the law firm and it's not good for the clients, right? Yeah. So I just kind of rethought the whole thing and said, I've been in-house for a couple of years. When it came time to transition out, I'm like, why don't I design the right thing? And I started off in one place and made a couple pivots along the way. And all of a sudden I'm like, fractional legal team. I actually called it integrated legal counsel at first. I'm like, I'm doing this integrated legal counsel because that described what I'm doing. But I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, the word fractional just like multiplied like rabbits. And I'm like, I guess we need to rename what we're doing because it's that's what people are going to be searching for. Fractional GCs, right? So fractional general counsel, fractional attorneys. Anyway, you can tell I'll just talk about this forever. That's not the engineer inside of me. That's the attorney coming out. But it is the right way to practice with small practices. It really is.
Yeah. And something else that you mentioned is a trend. I don't know if it's a trend, but it's something I'm seeing a lot of when I'm having discussions is people start out with the big clients where you have a really steady paycheck. The checks are going to clear when you're working with enterprise solutions and large companies, but the heart isn't there, right? So more and more people, I think, are leaving that behind and moving into how do I help the small guy? Because the U.S. is built on the backbone of small businesses. There are over 8 million small businesses in the United States. Thank you, Intuit Small Business Council, for the statistic. I just rolled off the council in May. So there's a lot of need, and there are a lot of things that small businesses don't know that they need as well.
Oh, for
and that's
sure.
Where
Yeah, no.
you come in, because you can ask the right questions and get entrepreneurs to think about areas that might be a few years down the road or, 5-10 steps down the road, but they need to be putting structure into place now.
Totally. Yeah. If I could do anything, I love how you said that. If I could do anything for my clients, a lot of whom are first time founders, some second and multiple time founders, right? If I could take my first time founders and get them to think like second time founders, that would be gold, right? It would improve so much because you make mistakes when you haven't been down that path before. It's just, my daughter went hiking the other day it's called Mount Timpanogos here locally. And she said, we started off on the wrong path and we started going down here because unfortunately I wasn't able to go with her. I really wanted to, but she took a couple of friends and went up. I was super proud of her. She's 18 and did this big long hike. And anyway, we walked down the wrong path first, but then we like saw this deer and we followed the deer for a bit because we wanted to see the deer. And we ended up on a different path, but we kept going there because that was the right path. But she just didn't know which trail to take right at the beginning because she didn't have me there with her. Fortunately, she made it. But, I talked to another guy after that, literally this was just last week, a week ago. And I talked to somebody else. I'm like, oh, my daughter was going hiking. He's like, I did that. Well, I tried to do that, but I started off and I took this other path. I'm certain it was the same one because I know which fork they're talking about. I took this other path. We went like 2 miles, 3 miles up that path, realized we were not going anywhere. And so we came back and by then it was too late. And we said, well, we're not going to be able to do the full 14 miles up and back. And so his experience was totally different because he also hadn't been down there. He just wasn't lucky enough to follow a random deer to the right trail. So anyway,
it's funny that you mentioned that because I was actually going to bring up that post because I was reading it earlier today. I have a 17-year-old daughter and we've spent the summer she did a summer program at one university overseas and now we're in Vancouver. She's doing a program here. And she thought that this university was her number one because it's beautiful. We're in British Columbia. There's a lot of nature, but she found very different experiences where it's an aha moment where she's like, oh, maybe this isn't the right school. Like it's beautiful, but is the education I'm going to get here the same as the other school that challenged me more in those 2 weeks?
Yeah.
And so but all of these things that our kids go through are exactly what you're saying, applicable to business startups and what path do we go down and how do we learn?
Yeah. So you were reading the post. I did a post, what was it, a week ago about confidence. I think that's the one you're talking about, right? And
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really what it is. But your daughter doesn't know that until she's been down there. And sometimes, there are certain things we can't, like, I wish I could have made a lot of decisions I've got 2 daughters out of the house and my third, Audrey that I'm talking about is headed out of the house this fall, next month, actually. Wow. So I'll only have one left at home. But, there are a lot of things I would have liked to have made decisions for them around because, I do it how I would do it, looking back on what I did and what I wish I had done. They don't want me to do that. And that's totally fair. Right. So they're on their own path, but I do make sure I'm like, hey, if this is what you're thinking, consider this, 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 and this, and at least try to give them a little bit more perspective that I have and they don't have yet. And they still get to make their own decisions, obviously, just like any founder we would work with. Hey, you should really put this and this and this in place before you try to give equity away to one of your co-founders. If they listen, awesome. If they don't listen, I mean, they'll learn. They'll learn when this business doesn't work out and their partnership, crumbles and they start their second one. They'll be like, oh, I should have done that right the first time, Yeah. So.
Yeah, that was perfect because that was my next question is how do you lead founders down a path? Because we can be very stubborn, right? And think that we know exactly what we want to do. And in hindsight is fantastic, but it doesn't help us get through the issues and go, oh, yeah, I really should listen to that person and structure things this way so that I wouldn't be in this position I'm in now. I think most of us probably go through that when we're starting our first or second, if it's a micro business.
Yeah, we totally do. Because listen, unless you're in different circumstances than 99% of the population, you've got constraints on time, resources, energy, like money, like we've got constraints and those are going to influence how you make decisions. Oftentimes saying, well, do I hire this attorney? No, because I don't have the money to hire him. Like I don't even have the option to hire him if I wanted to, perhaps. You'll make different decisions and it might work and it might not, but we're all resource constrained, right? With time and money, especially. And so your question, how do we get people to listen? I wish I could do what I think doctors used to do in the past. And that was you go visit the doctor and the doctor just says, here you go, do this. And that's all you do. They don't ask your opinion. They don't really necessarily dig for more information sometimes. I think doctors are getting better at it, but it was really prescriptive. Do this. And we just did it because the doctor said to do it. Not really my approach. I don't think it's well received by a lot of the people I work with who, by definition, are out there innovating new things, going down paths that didn't exist, and at least comfortable enough and competent enough to take those steps into the unknown. And so they don't necessarily always want somebody to tell them what to do, even if they understand that it could be helpful. So it's not really prescriptive, but what I try to do, I've tried to teach my team is, let's just talk in terms of options and risks. Hey, you've got A, B, and C. The highest risk is option C. There's probably a lot of reasons not to do it. I'll tell you why. The lowest is probably option A. Here's why I would recommend that. Or maybe it's option A is the best, but it's going to be a lot more, cost to put the right things in place. So maybe option B has a little bit more risk for your situation, where you either build a company with a little bit of risk, or you can't afford to build a company at all. Maybe you're going to build the company with a little bit more risk, right? And so I understand that. I get that. And I've watched founders make lots of decisions that way, just like I've watched my kids make lots of decisions that I'm like, well, that's not what I would do, but it's an option, and you'll probably be able to recover from it if things don't go the way that you think they will. So,
right. Well, look, you mentioned innovation, and that was one of my questions as well, is you have this insight profile concept. Yeah. And I think that's really interesting. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you put that together, what that looks like, and how you use it.
So, yeah. So this is a newer thing for me, but I've been thinking about, the founders I work with, they all have some shared qualities. I mean, they're all visionary, they're all tenacious, they're all sometimes risk tolerant, we might call it, right? They have some shared qualities, but they operate so differently. And just like I've got 4 kids, I don't know why I keep this whole kid thing is coming up constantly. I hope it's helpful.
No, it is helpful. And I mean, I think many of my guests are parents. I'm a mom. So, bring it on.
So with 4 kids, I have at least 4 different personalities I'm dealing with, right? And so they learn differently. They're motivated differently. And I started thinking about that. And I'm like, well, all these innovators that I work with, and I work with companies who are either sometimes full of innovators or at least building their core offering around innovation, new technology, new product, new brand, new platform. They're building something that didn't exist, something that came from their head into the real world, right? Because they made it happen. And so they're all innovators, but not every innovator innovates the same way. Not every leader gets insight in the same way or processes new perspectives in the same way. And I started thinking about that. I'm like, there really should be, we've got all these things out there about personality, colors, and, the Enneagrams and all this stuff. Right. And I'm like, who's talking to the innovators? Who's talking to these visionary people trying to build new businesses, trying to build teams where they integrate different types of innovative people into one cohesive team, right? And I thought so I did what every good business person would do, and I just made something up, right? I think it's really valuable, but I came up with these insight profiles, and there's 7 of them, and it really tells you, if we're working, and I use it to try to assess the people I'm working with, right? So, for example, I am what I would call a trailblazer, right? I don't necessarily want to always go down the path that exists. I see the paths that exist, and sometimes I'm just going to go down the middle and see what's down the middle because there's no path there, but I want to find out. I'm an experimenter. I'm an explorer. And so I gain insight. I learn new things and find new perspectives that are valuable to me by going into new territory where paths don't necessarily exist. Other people aren't that way, right? Other people, they're just what I would call a nomad. They go and they travel and they just get exposure to all these new cultures and worlds. And, moving to Vancouver, you find something new. Traveling to Europe, you find something different. And you see things. And by exposing yourself to these other things that already exist, you're like, oh, why doesn't this type of restaurant business in, Italy exist in Southern California? Maybe I'll bring that here. And so that's a different type of approach to gaining insight, right? Other people, they're just straight up rule breakers, right? They are like, there's a rule for that. Oh, I'm going to do whatever I can to break that rule because you know what? I just like breaking rules. And I might have a little bit of that in me too sometimes, but I'm not my dominant. Other people, they're hackers, which it sounds like a rule breaker, but a bit different. You know, they're like, hey, I'm going to take this system that exists and I just love like tearing it apart and putting it back together better. I'm going to figure out, sometimes that is also rule breaking, like hacking systems, right? Could be rule breaking, but sometimes hackers are just like, how do I optimize this thing so it works better? And I'm driven by that. So you can see there's different people are driven by different ways of gaining insight or perspective. And I believe that gaining new insight or new perspective is really the first step to establishing strategy. So in your business, maybe in your personal life, we're not motivated to do stuff until we're like, oh, I realized that there's this better way to do something. That aha moment, right? That why isn't anybody doing this? How many of us have said that? It's like, why isn't anybody doing this before? And then 2 years later, you're like, that was my idea. I just didn't do anything with it. So I think people, just like we have different maybe social personalities or profiles or things like that, right? I think we have different innovative or what I call insight profiles, which lead us to innovate and lead us to different strategic positions for ourselves, either personally or in business. It's something that I'm exploring further. I'm working with some people on this, and it's fascinating to me because I think it helps us to understand ourselves and the people around us. And I have visions, of course, that this will roll out into something bigger where, you know, you get a team and you basically assess the insight profiles of different people. And it could be the CFO has an insight profile that's probably very different from the CEO, which is different from the, your engineering team and if I think I'm hypothesizing, I'm not there yet, but I'm hypothesizing that there's a way to take these individual insight profiles, mesh them together effectively. Kind of like DISC. Have you heard of DISC? That, are you the DI? Yeah. Which one are you? And knowing who the other person is that helps you to communicate better with them. I think knowing who your other insight profiles are that you're working with will allow you to then communicate your insights better to them in ways that they can receive them, right? I've worked with some people, they're very frustrated innovators because nobody listens to them. Well, it's not that your ideas are bad necessarily. Maybe you're not good at communicating them to other people in a way that makes sense. And so there's this aspect of how do I get insight? How do I process it? But then there's this aspect of how do I communicate it? How do I empower other people to receive it? How do I act on that insight? And I think all of that's going to come together in a fun way. That's I've got some of it on my computer, laid out, but it's still in the works. But it's helpful for me to think about the people I work with and the people I interact with.
Well, I was just thinking, I'm teaching a digital leadership course right now, and a lot of it is just discussion on different profiles and leadership styles. But I've also had them do emotional intelligence tests, and I'm also the leadership compass. And then they did, some other tests that they had to do, Clifton Strengths. And next week, we're going to look at conflict resolution strategies. But I also am like, oh, if you had this ready, I could have my whole class take it too, because I think this is the next step. And knowing that a lot of people, maybe half of my students are working for corporations or organizations that they want to stay at and just move up. And then the rest are going to decide to go out on their own and be entrepreneurs. So I think this is going to be a really invaluable tool and asset for you and your business.
I'm happy to talk a little bit further with you about it. I have some of it ready, and maybe you could let you test a little bit out if you want to. But here's the power of this, I think, is that if we like insights, and I use that word all the time now, insights, right? New perceptions, new learnings, they're so powerful because they drive, every business out there is like, we run a business, we know what we're doing, and we can predict where we're going because it is predictable, it's known, but it's those sparks that really create the energy in the business. Like, hey, what if we tried this? And everybody gets around it and they're like, yeah, that's awesome. And all this energy goes into building something new. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But that's where I think insights are where the sparks and the energy happen. Even in companies that have, ongoing operations, successful, profitable businesses, but everybody's out there looking for that edge. And I think I don't think that edge hardly ever comes from doing something you're already doing or doing something somebody else is already doing. You have to figure out a slightly different way to apply it and to do it differently to gain the edge. Just like the fractional legal team stuff, right? How many law firms out there have they're huge law firms. They have they're more expert than my little team, right? But they're not set up to deliver the services the same way we deliver it. And that's our edge right now. Maybe it won't be in the future. We'll have to find a new edge, but that's our edge right now. Nobody else is doing it. We're unique. And it was just from, maybe some deliberate, forced, thoughtful actions on my part to say, how do I really interact with the clients the way that I think they need to be interacted with and the way that is most successful for them. So that even what I'm doing today is the result of, just a few new insights along the way put into action. And that's all it is.
Yeah. Well, and that's something a lot of us as marketers are also looking at is following the data, right? Really thinking of a strategy based on insights and data and making that a core component instead of, like you said, what is everybody else doing? What is the status quo? What are we being told we should be doing because of our, brand value or our area of expertise? But knowing that each organization, as we've mentioned time and time again in this, is individual and is going to have a slightly different path, having those insights and that data and then understanding what we can do to be better and to stand out and to propel ourselves forward in our own unique way is going to be 100% the future of business. And I think it is the future. It is something we need to be doing now, but I think more people are waking up to it.
I agree with that. I'm going to put one more hypothesis out there that I think is probably true, but I haven't proven it. I realized when I picked the word insights, I'm going to get a lot of people talking strictly about data insights, right? Everything's data driven.
Part of it, but it's not all of it. Yeah.
Well, here's my hypothesis, and I could be wrong. My hypothesis is that insight is very rarely data driven, but it's data validated, right? Well, I think we use data to try to find insights, but what we're really doing is we're really trying to just find the patterns. And AI, going back to the very beginning of our conversation, AI probably can't do this yet because AI just doesn't think outside the box as much. But as humans, we can pull something literally from our childhood memories and say, I see all this marketing data out there. And for some reason, I'm connecting it with this time I was riding a bike down the whatever, right? And I'm like, boom, there's an insight. There's a connection that I can make that AI just can't make. Data doesn't make it. Data presents the patterns, but I think insight is the true human ability, right? And then what we're really saying when we say we use data to find insights, what we're really saying is we have insights and we're using data to validate those insights, right? Otherwise, I think we're just talking about we're using data to find patterns. And is a pattern an insight? I don't know. I'm not sure it is. A lot of the inventors I work with, I'm not sure that they're using data to invent stuff. They're saying, I have a problem. Why isn't there something for this? And then they're like, oh, this is what it should be, right? So a lot of people are certainly being insightful and innovative without data. But so I'll be curious to see if there is some type of maybe granularity between actual data processing, data insights and innovation insights.
And I agree. Those are two very distinct things in marketing world and digital media. Insights help us formulate what we're going to do to brand an organization, right?
Yeah.
And knowing that, for instance, user-generated content performs much higher rate than professionally produced content. So that's a whole other area than we're talking about innovation. I'm seeing what you're saying in terms of even something that I just did, which is, and actually put your profile through this process of, okay, I've had a couple of people who have been not great interviews. I am not releasing these episodes. It's a waste of their time. It's a waste of my time. Doesn't make their agency look great. So what can I do? So then I worked with AI and formulated, here are the 4 things that are most important for my podcast. These are the qualities I want to see. Let's do some deeper research. So I created a agentic tech stack to do that. And I think you were one of the first people that I actually put through that. And of course you got, yes, book this person immediately. But that was an innovation that I did for myself And the insights it gave me, yes, it gave me a score for each of my 4 main areas, but it also gave deeper insights in terms of why I gave that score, what I found out about a person, any red flags, topics we should discuss. Of course, I don't even look at that for these interviews often, because I just like us to freeform and kind of see where we go with a tiny bit of structure. But creating that for myself, now I have other people who want to use it.
That's awesome.
But I didn't create it because of data insights that I was getting from other, oh, we need another tech stack. We need another SaaS tool for this problem. I did it to solve my own issue, knowing that I also use these other products. So I do see your point there. So I think there's a delineation between my marketing hat and my entrepreneur hat.
Well, I'll tell you why I say that, because I'm jealous of marketing. That's the simple answer right there. As I dug into this whole world of strategy, I'm like IP strategy and business strategy. I'm like, the marketing world is so smart. They have essentially taken the whole concept of strategy and put it, everything, when you hear the word strategy, chief strategy officer, go-to-market strategy, everything is a marketing strategy. And I kind of want to, in my own little world, I'm like, no, marketing strategy is just part of business strategy, just like IP and patent strategy is part of business strategy. But the marketing world has really taken kind of the top position when you think about strategy. And so there's a part of me, I literally had this same connection when I started saying, well, insights and blah, blah, blah. And I started looking into it. I'm like, oh, data insights. Marketing did it to me again. Marketing is taking the top position on being insightful. And so I'm just jealous. That's why I say it.
No, but actually, because we were talking a little bit about SEO working for how people are discovering your firm when they're doing searches. And I think it'd be pretty easy to brand yourself as the legal insight team because of that very reason, right? You're going to stand out among everything else when people are searching for insights. So that's actually a bonus for you.
I like that. Yes.
Yeah. So you appear on podcasts, you obviously do some marketing, advertising, SEO work. What else? You were getting clients in through referrals, but then they were not always the right client. So what are some other things that you do to get you as a brand, your organization as a brand out there and get that inflow of clients that you want?
Oh, I didn't know you were going to expose my weaknesses on this podcast, but no, I remember early on when I was doing work, I went out on my own, left that firm in California, was out for a couple of years, ran into a buddy of mine, some ice cream place or whatever. I was out with my wife and saw Andy, and Andy works at a bank. He looked pretty ragged for how young we still were. I think he was working long hours and stuff. And I remember telling him, oh yeah, it's not bad. I don't even have to do any marketing. And a couple of years after that, I'm like, that was the dumbest thing to think I don't need to do any marketing, but I didn't, I could have a business. It could be like any, plumbing company or whatever. Like, you don't necessarily have to do marketing. People are going to call you and you'll have work. But thinking back on that before I went to go get I'm like, that was kind of ignorant statement. That was like a naive way to approach business. Right. So I've really tried to do a lot of marketing things. And I will say a lot of them have not worked out well, whether it's writing a book, creating a workshop to teach people how to do certain legal things, creating other things, posting on LinkedIn has worked. So I would say, in a vulnerable state here, we're still looking, right? We're still exploring. Our podcasting is one of the things we're doing for two reasons. One, I think the legal world really, and clients probably have to push this onto attorneys. They need to be demanding that they get services similar to what we're offering, whether that's from us or from somebody else. This is the way to get what you need as a small business client. So I'm getting the word out generally, but there's also a marketing aspect to that. The other thing I'm doing is I'm actually launching a podcast. It's not totally done yet. I'm probably 75% the way there. I think it's going to launch next month. And so there's a podcast I'm launching that is really directed to, I talked to somebody at one point and they're like, why aren't you doing a podcast and targeting your target clients? I'm like, I don't know. That's a really good question. Cause I was thinking about a podcast on like strategy or something like that. I'm like I like talking about that stuff. I like talking about innovation, but you're right. If I'm doing a podcast, I ought to be targeting my clients as guests and building relationships from the point of the recording onward. And so we're doing that next. And, things are really, for us from a marketing sense, despite the splattering of, or smattering, whatever the word is, of things that we're doing. Like things are going well. We're finding the right people, and the right people are finding us because our message resonates. I just need to get that message out further than I'm getting it now. And, being a guest and being a host that's the next step.
Yeah. Well, I won't argue with that because you get all the marketing and advertising material you need out of every episode. So yeah.
It's been a blast so far. I'll say that. I've loved being a guest and talking about these things. So people like you have done such a good job of helping me to explain what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, I think this is much needed. So I did want to ask a question about pricing because there are a lot of small businesses that also are very bootstrapped and don't know what kind of, where do they make the first investments, and can they afford to hire a fractional legal team?
Yeah. And a lot of people early on can't. And so there's still this aspect of we need to do one or two projects for clients, get their business set up, file their first patent, maybe if you're an inventor type, help your founders get together and organize appropriately. There's some things where people can't do that, but it's a matter of funding, really. It's not a matter of whether or not it's the right thing to do. It's just a matter of funding. And so what we've done, it kind of also in line with recognizing that, the people we're working with maybe haven't been down the right path before, but they're adults and can make informed decisions, is to inform our clients. And so we typically, for everything we do, try to offer packages. Do you want package A, B, or C? I call it the basic, the plus, or the premium. And we do it with patents and trademarks, and we do it with, things that are easily packaged, starting a new business or, entity formation type stuff. All of that, it's like, which one do you want? And it's most often with our clients, it's budget driven. Well, I want this one, but I can afford this one. Great. Here's what you get. You know what you're getting, and the scope of it up front. The price of it up front. It's predictable, fixed fee oftentimes. And we do the same with our packages for fractional. Not that our fractional packages are really customized because every client is different. Some are really IP heavy, some are dispute heavy, some are just contract heavy, some are like wild and everywhere. But so what I do to try to help that conversation move forward is I say, I've got some sample packages, basic plus premium, because I'm an engineer at heart still. I've got a matrix that'll show you what's in every package and what's not. And I've got a table describing all of the things that are in the matrix. So I send people this, 8 or 10 page document. And I'm like, use this as a point of reference because, of course, if I could, if I had the budget to buy X house or X car or go on whatever vacation, like that's what I would want. But I look at my budget, I say, well, my budget for this activity is probably not the premium every time. It might be the plus or the basic perhaps. So really creating those options and describing, well, this is what you should be looking at. And, and then the other part of that, going back to the doctor reference that we had before is, and I've tried, I don't think a lot of attorneys are great at this. I've talked to my team a lot about this. I said, hey, people come to us, not just because we're experts, but because they want a recommendation. Like they want us to say, not just say, hey, here are the packages, here are your options, here are the risks, whatever. They want us to say, here are the packages, here are the risks that you're dealing with. And from my perspective in your situation, I think you should be considering this. And give them that direction. They, it goes a long way, a lot further than to just say, I don't know, go to the store. What kind of bread do you want to buy? There's all these different types of bread. There's wheat and there's white and there's, Texas toast or whatever. Like that's, you choose. It's like, no, well, what are you making? You're making French toast on Saturday morning for your kids and their friends. You're not going to want necessarily all the wheat bread or the multigrain bread for that, depending on how you guys eat. I don't know. So make a recommendation, right? So packages and recommendations. That was my attorney long-winded answer to what we try to do with our clients. And we're really just trying to communicate with them in a way that they can take it, process it, and, receive our recommendation if it's helpful to them, but then make an informed decision.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Jeff, I know we're going to have your website in the show notes. You also love speaking to small businesses, entrepreneurs, inventors. So you're offering a free strat session. So thank you for that. We'll have all of that information in the show notes. So I want to ask you, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, verse, poem, family motto, words that continue to inspire you?
Yes, I absolutely do. And I'm a broken record on this one too. It was 12 or 15 years ago when I came up with the idea of innovate with confidence. That was like, as I was looking at my role working with innovators, and it also, I think, applies similarly to other people around me, kids and family especially. In fact, the post that you referenced the other day was building off of that slogan that I adopted, innovate with confidence. I don't know of a better way to do something with my family or the people I work with than to help them be innovative, because I think there's true value in that. Not value for those around you, but also there's like, we receive value when we innovate new things. We're energized. It sparks something inside of us that comes alive that didn't exist before. And so I think the aspect of innovating is super important for us as humans even. And then I believe that doing that with confidence and being able to, maybe from a legal guide perspective, instill some of that confidence in those people around me, or maybe as a father, instill some of that confidence in my kids. I hope that to me is kind of, all applicable. And I haven't had a reason to change it since I came up with it. So you'll see that on all my stuff. Innovate with confidence.
Amazing. Can't think of better words to inspire everybody to do the same. So thank you, Jeff. This has been really fun conversation.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you to everybody who's watching this episode or listening to it on your favorite platform. I'll be back again with another amazing guest very shortly.
Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrandamplified.com.